Good morning, everyone. Before anything else, I need to tell you something that may disappoint some of you. This lecture is not a substitute for reading. In fact, my goal for today is the exact opposite. If things go as planned, my goal for this brief recorded lecture is that you should feel slightly frustrated because you will realize that I have opened doors that I cannot possibly close today. That frustration is actually intentional because university education begins not when all your questions are answered. It begins when your old questions die and better questions are born. So let me begin with one. Let us go back to 1956. The Philippines had already been independent for 10 years. The Americans are gone. The Japanese occupation has ended. The Second World War is over. The country has far more immediate problems: poverty, land reform, communist insurgency, economic reconstruction. Now, suppose I ask you, what issue do you think consumed the Philippine Senate at that time? Was it inflation? No. Foreign policy? No. Agrarian reform? Possibly, but no. The issue that almost tore the nation apart in 1956 was whether college students should read Nolime Tangere and El Filibusterismo without censorship. It's about a class requirement about what to read. That's what tore the country apart, or almost tore the country apart in 1956. Entire newspapers argued, priests preached about it, that issue. Students protested, politicians shouted, the church intervened, families fought over what? Over a novel. That should already bother you. Because books do not create national crises unless they are not merely books. This is the first point that Reynaldo Ileto plants in this chapter. The Rizal Bill was never really just about Rizal. It was about something much bigger. It was a war. Perhaps a rhetorical war. No, it's a war of ideologies. It's a war over Philippine history itself. Notice the title of the of the chapter by Ileto. It's not the Rizal Bill. It's not RA 1425. He calls it history wars. Not political war, but history wars. Why might that be the case? Because whoever controls the story of the past controls how a nation imagines its future. That idea is one of the deepest lessons you will encounter in this course: Life and Works of Rizal. History is never only about yesterday. History is always an argument about tomorrow. Now, here is the second surprise. Most textbooks present the Rizal Law like this: Senator Claro Recto, Senator Jose Laurel, the Catholic Church, they debate, the law is passed, end of story. But Ileto says, no, you cannot understand what happened in 1956 if you stay in 1956. Because the Senate chamber was haunted. It was haunted by ghosts. Not literal ghosts, but historical ghosts. The ghost of Spain, the ghost of America, and the ghost of Japan. Three empires, all arguing inside one great debate. That might sound a little poetic, but perhaps Ileto meant it a little bit more literally. Because every senator who stood up to speak was carrying memories from different empires. Some had childhood memories of American soldiers burning their hometowns. Some had lived under Spain. Some even collaborated with Japan, and others resisted Japan. They were not simply debating books, they were debating which empire would define the Filipino nation. Suddenly, the Rizal Bill becomes a little stranger. The debate is not just about education policy, what should be taught, right? But it is a battlefield of memory. Which brings us to the third surprise. Think carefully. Why would Jose Laurel and Claro Recto insist that students must read the original Rizal? Why can't they just rely on radio dramas, watch videos about it, the contemporary context, or have it adapted into cartoons or comics? Why read Rizal, no, in its original form? The knowledge, the all of the works of Rizal in their primary texts, no? The answer is because they believe that Filipinos no longer knew Rizal. Wait, Filipinos no longer knew Rizal? Do you know Rizal, dear students? They believe that Filipinos no longer knew Rizal. How could that be? Everybody knows Rizal. There were many monuments. Diba? We have a monument there in Plaza Rizal. We have national holidays. Diba? We celebrate his death. His face is everywhere. School celebrated Rizal Day. Yeah. His portrait hung in many, many classrooms. But Jose Laurel has noticed a little something that might have escaped our attention. It is that Rizal's novels, quote, live only as names to be mentioned on auspicious occasions. End quote. What does that mean? In other words, we had preserved the hero, but we have buried his ideas. Imagine saying today, we honor Rizal too much to actually read him. No? We only remember the existence of a hero, but we have domesticated him. We have forgotten the ideas that are actually very, very revolutionary. They're disruptive because they unsettle us. We just remember how many women he had, how many places he has gone to, diba? But we have forgotten the power of his ideas, the context in which those ideas were formed, the influences, right? This argument, basically. That's exactly what Laurel was trying to say. Now, we come to Ileto's central insight. Ileto argues that America did not merely colonize Philippine territory, although that's true. They colonized our territory. However, a little bit more deeply than that, America also colonized Philippine memory. The Americans did not erase Rizal. They reshaped him. They preferred a Rizal who loved education, a peaceful Rizal, a reformist Rizal, a safe Rizal. Not the Rizal whose books ignited revolution. Not the Rizal whose ideas had terrified colonial governments. Not the Rizal whose novels were dangerous enough to get him executed. That version became a bit quieter, safer, more useful, domesticated. So, when Laurel and Recto demanded that students read the novels themselves, they were not merely assigning literature. It's not just any other classic, no, any other great book. Instead, they were trying to recover a Rizal buried beneath decades of official interpretation. Think about how radical that is. They were saying, do not believe people when they say that they know Rizal. And do not believe what people say Rizal believed. Instead, read him. Okay? Read him for yourself on your own. Do not rely on their interpretations. Encounter his works on your own. And my view is that that is precisely what a university should always do. You, students, should encounter ideas on your own, okay, by reading. Reading not interpretations, but the texts themselves. That's true for Rizal, that's true for perhaps when we talk about readings in Philippine history, which is another subject, or the great books, which is another subject, literature. Do not rely on interpretations. Go back to the original text, no matter how difficult that is. And that is precisely what we will be doing in this course. Then Ileto gives us another astonishing image. He describes the Senate debates in 1956. Now, given the milieu, modern readers like you and me might imagine English speeches. Instead, the debates actually constantly moved between English and Spanish. Entire speeches in Spanish, entire documents read aloud in Spanish. Nobody translated them because the senators were expected to understand. Kita nga si Robert Padilla ni, dapat mag-Tagalog tayo, mag-Filipino tayo. But then, by then, they had debates in Spanish, no translations. Because Congress, on the one hand, is expected to be composed of the best and the brightest in the country. Look at the Congress now. Still a few of them, but many perhaps did not pass that qualification. But simultaneously, Spanish was still the air they breathed at the time. Even if you're not one of the congressmen, many of the people then were still conversant, at least, or they understood a little Spanish. Imagine entering the Congress today and hearing half the debate in Spanish, right? Those senators in 1956 belonged to a generation standing between two civilizations. They had one foot in Spain and another foot in America. Their very language is revelatory. Right? Their very language revealed their historical position. Language itself became historical evidence, evidence of the fact that they are formed by two different empires. They've lived through two worlds, Spain, Spanish, and America, English. Now, we arrive at what I think is the emotional center of the chapter. The Catholic Church opposed the bill. Okay. Why? Because the novels criticize abusive friars. That much everybody knows. But Recto, Clarem Recto, did something brilliant. He did not simply disagree. Recto produced documents from 1887. The original condemnations of Nolime Tangere by the Spanish friars. Then he compared them with the Catholic hierarchy's objections in 1956 to the Rizal Bill. And then he essentially asked, why do these sound almost identical? It's devastating. Notice what happened. The debate is no longer between Rizal and the friars. It has become a debate over whether history itself has repeated. Can the past return? Can institutions survive political revolutions while keeping old habits? Suddenly the question becomes much larger than the church. But it was also a critique, an imminent critique of the church, because the church then is already mainly, or for a majority of them, composed of Filipinos. No? While the church in 1887 was predominantly still not. Okay? So they basically these Filipinos now are repeating what the non-Filipino clergy or friars were arguing against the Filipinos previously, in the previous century. So, yeah, Ileto, however, is not yet finished. Ileto introduced introduced the empire that most Filipinos least expect when we talk about Rizal. Ileto brings up Japan. Now, what has Japan have to do with Rizal? Now, it's because the Japanese occupation accidentally disrupted the dominance of the United States. Some Filipino leaders, including Laurel and Directo, used that disruption to recover older Filipino historical memories, even older than the American occupation. Now, um, that does not mean that Ileto was saying that Japan is good. Do not misunderstand him. His point is a little subtle. It's that history produces unexpected openings. Even oppressive regimes sometimes create spaces where forgotten histories reappear. And perhaps that is a disturbing thought for some of us. History is never black and white. History is never morally simple. Now, throughout the chapter, Ileto almost never asks, was the Rizal bill good or bad? That was not his question. Instead, he asks, what historical memories made people argue in this way? That, arguably, is what historians do. Historians ask different questions instead of asking who was right. Okay? The pro Rizal bill people or the anti Rizal bill people. Historians instead ask, why do intelligent people believe what they believe? That difference separates history from propaganda. So, where does this leave us? If you live today remembering only one sentence, let it be this: the Rizal Law is not simply about requiring students to read Rizal, although it was that. It was, more deeply, a struggle over which version of Philippine history would educate future generations. And that struggle has never really ended. Every generation rewrites Rizal. Every generation argues over Bonifacio. Every generation decides which heroes deserve monuments and which ideas deserve silence. And this decision does not have to be deliberate. It sometimes is decided upon by omission, by failing to do what could have been done. Which brings us to the uncomfortable question I want to leave you with. If America produced one version of Rizal, if Laurel and Recto tried to recover another, if historians like Reynaldo Ileto challenge both, which Rizal do you know? Okay. The bronze statue, the martyr, the novelist, the revolutionary, or perhaps a Rizal you have never actually read. This is precisely why Life and Works of Rizal, Life and Works of Rizal as a university course exists. not to teach you what to think about Rizal, not the content primarily, but to remove every excuse for not encountering him directly. So let me just close with this. I'm requiring you to read the entire chapter by Ileto and the law as well. Okay. RA 1425. And then I hope those questions will linger in your minds a little long. Which version of Rizal do you know?